Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. How's everybody doing out there today? Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So I have the 2021 Goldmoney Asian Rapid as part of the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. Today is day 1, and we have 5 rounds today. So I'm going to see how magical I can get some videos done. I at least have this one. But for all my people in the Philippines, mabuhay to you, kamusta na? Masaya akong makinig muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking video. Appreciate you guys very much. For anybody who is coming from Poland, or who does like Jan, Krzysztof Duda, I will say Shest and Jen Koyechi. Appreciate you guys very much for coming by. I know I had a guy that was mentioning Duda a couple of times in the comments. So this one's for you, my guy, and of course Wesley. So this is taken from round 5 from day 1. So if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. All right, so we got d4, knight comes to f6. We got c4, e6, knight to c3, bishop to b4. So we have the Nimzo Indian defense. Pretty popular, defense. You guys might have heard of it before. It's kind of known. We got e3, castles. We got bishop coming to d3. We see d5. You guys know it's coming. A3. And, we're not worried about bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, because, this tension is going to be resolved, whether by capture here or capture here. And, you're going to end up with the structure with this open B file type situation. Bam. Okay. So we do see pawn takes c4. We got bishop takes c4, and we see c5. You guys knew it was coming. You guys were sitting there like, man, c5 is going to come at some point. I'm a c5 genius. I know. You guys are c5 geniuses out there. We got knight coming to f3, queen to c7, trying to be sneaky with this bishop over here. Hoping that white falls asleep and says, hey, I don't even like my bishop. But we do see bishop coming back to e2. We see b6. We got bishop to b2, bishop to b7. We see castles. We got rook over to d8. We see rook to e1, knight b to d7. We got c4, rook a to c8, and then we see bishop back to f1, and this is the novelty of the game. It's still holding this. It's still holding this pawn, but we're just trying to clear the space for this the queen and the rook, and maybe the rook might swing over here and stuff like that. So as you can see, it actually gets pretty dicey for black coming up. Not that it's that much better for white, but you can see that you can kind of feel that there's a difference. So we see pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4. We got knight over to g4. We got g3, queen comes to c6, like dreaming of that, stereotypical checkmate on g2 where you can just put the queen, you're hoping for like, the bishop moves over here and then the knight like just goes for a vacation somewhere and then you see queen to g2 a checkmate, but we're not going to see that. We see bishop to g2, knight g comes back to f6. We see rook over to c1. And now we see a position where the queen really needs to move because you have this bishop eyeing it. You have this rook eyeing it. So c6 is not a very comfortable square for the queen to be on. So we do see queen stepping over to b6, to d6. And then we see queen to b3. Now, there's a variation that I'm actually going to show you that like when I talked before about, the position not being so much greater, but you can feel that there's a big difference. There actually is a slight difference in this variation. Like I said, queen to b3 is what we saw in the game. But if we did take a look at an alternate variation, d5 was actually nice in this position. Basically, after pawn takes d5, you actually have knight to d4 as an in-between move because this pawn is pinned to this bishop. And you are also activating this knight very severely to put it on one of these squares, which is killer. We definitely don't want it to get to e7 because it's going to be forking the king and it's going to be forking the rook. So we would probably see g6. We see knight to b5, queen coming back to b8. And then we see queen to d4. And as you guys can see this position, it is about probably a pawn's worth of an advantage, even though you are down a pawn as white. But the point being, like, look at all these pieces. Literally every single piece of whites is doing like a beautiful job. And you kind of have this like clump of pieces over here that aren't doing as much as white's pieces are doing. So it's kind of crazy to think about because it kind of just seems like pushing d5 loses a pawn. But this is some really deep computer stuff. You know, sometimes humans can be doing it, but we do see queen to b3 in the game. We got bishop down to e4. We see bishop down to f1. We got h6, a4. Queen comes back to b8. We do see h4. You know, we're possibly trying to see if we can, you know, kind of creep the king up a little bit like this and fix the pawn structure right here, you know, with h5 type of move for an in-game type situation. We do see rook coming to c7 and we see g4. It's not the sneakiest move, but it's just kind of interesting, you know, because, of course, if you saw something like knight takes g4, rook's going to be taking e4 and you just lost a piece, so you're not going to be doing that. So, you know, g4, as interesting as it looks, it is a free move, and that pawn is very safe there. But we do see queen coming to a8. Now we do have a protection of this bishop, so we do have to do something with this pawn here on g2. We see knight down to d2, adding a double attack onto this bishop. After the bishop retreats to b7, we do see g5, pawn takes g5, pawn takes g5. We see knight over to h5, and this is actually a situation where this knight is actually grim on the rim. It is not a redirecting move. It's not going to be like, you know, living on f4 or anything. So it is actually kind of misplaced just a little bit. Too much for black's liking. So we do see d5. We got pawn takes d5, and then we see the swing of the queen over to h3. You know, it's looking, you know, this knight, you know, like I said, is looking kind of unhappy. It's like, I don't like being here on h5. Like, so we got g6, really the only move that makes any type of sense to protect this knight. We see bishop to e2. And like I said before, this knight is really, really scared because it's about to get took. We see d4, and then we see bishop takes h5, pawn takes h5. And then we have reached a position that if you do want to go ahead and stop the video and see if you can guess the strongest move in the position for white. Seems like you have like a lot of options, but there is one move that really takes advantage of a certain situation that black has gotten themselves into. Go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So there's obviously a couple of different moves that you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking, okay, let me just take the pawn, right? That's a very legitimate move. It's not the strongest move, but it is a move. It's you know, there's really two like positive moves in a position, and that is one of them. But backing up, what we actually saw in the game was rook to e7, but I'm actually not looking for either one of those two moves. If we back up just a touch and look at this position, something that you should notice as white, if you're looking at your opponent's position, is the fact that their king side is crazy open and they do not have a dark squared bishop. So as you notice, all of these squares around the king are very, very vulnerable, and the knight has been restricted from coming into f6 to defend, you know, a little bit of their king. So the strongest move in the position by far is bishop takes d4. And it might kind of seem suspect because you are putting these pieces on the same line and you do have the ability to go like a knight to f8. But bishop will come back to c3. And like I said before, this pawn is absolutely dropping. And you are really, really looking vulnerable in this part of the board. And if you notice, a lot of black's pieces are kind of hanging out on the queen side, not really helping their king. So this king is very, very exposed. So, I mean, the king is scared. So taking on d4 clears this beautiful diagonal for this bishop and just, you know, basically just makes you pushing your game forward just, you know, that much crazier. So we might see something like rook to c5, but then we got queen taking h5. And, I mean, you guys see the position that we're in right here. This is very dire position for black to be in. And you can see this queen is crouching in. You know, this rook can come up here on a 7th rank and stuff like that. It's looking really, 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 really suspect. But like I said, in the game, we saw pawn takes h5, and then we did see rook to e7. Unfortunately, rook to e7 is an okay move, but it does allow black the ability to try to somewhat defend the position with rook to e8. Now you're challenging, you're challenging this rook very severely. We do have kind of like a nice little idea that Wesley So came up with, which is actually rook takes f7. And then the king takes f7, and then we see queen taking h5 with check. King comes back to g8. We see king to g6 with check. Of course, you know, we don't want to move the king over here because we're going to be looking at bishop to d4 and then we're going to be getting mated. So the king is going to have to go to f8, and then you see queen to d6 with check, rook comes to e7, and you see queen taking c7, which is really nice calculation when you think about it. You know, yes, it wasn't like the best possible, you know, string of moves in the position, but I mean, if you have to think about the fact that when you consider rook to e7, you know, you're looking at rook to e7, rook takes, queen takes, king goes back, queen check, king over to f8, and then queen checking over here on d6. Like, you see all these arrows. You know, you see how much of a calculation that Wesley so had to put into that combination. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely a kudos situation. So we do see queen to d6, and then rook comes down, and then we see queen taking c7. So we got king over to g8. We see bishop takes d4 now. And it's not as crazy, but I mean, it's still very nice to have this bishop on this really, really long diagonal. But as you can see, black is starting to drum up, you know, a lot of counterplay in the situation compared to what we would have seen before. So the rook does come over to h7, and now you do kind of have a little bit of problems on this h1 square, because you have all of these pieces that are just kind of trained down there, and you see the king is kind of stalemated right now. So we see f3 trying to block. The bishop does take on f3, and we see a really, really beautiful in-between move here. A Zweishenzug move with g6. And it's interesting because g6 is actually the only move to play in the position. So not only is it an in-between move, it's the only move that you had to find. And Wesley so does find it. So, you know, that's a nice find by him. So we see rook to h1 with check. Now, also, after g6, you do have to understand that you're going to be getting checked on h1. And so this is actually, I mean, even though it is much better for white, this is very scary looking. So this is one of those situations where, as a human being, you might be able to like misunderstand the position and think you're actually losing when you're not. So the rook comes to h1 with check. We see king to f2, queen over to e8, and rook takes h1. I think is one of the boldest moves that you can make in the position, because it looks like you're actually possibly getting mated in this position, because you got the queen that's about to swing down here, and that's actually what happens. So you got the queen swinging down. So you have to have the confidence to know that that you have some way out of the scenario. Queen comes to e2 with check. We see king to g3. Bishop takes h1. We see queen taking d7. And you have to have the confidence like moves ago that you're not about to get mated. And that's the crazy thing about it. Queen comes to g3 with check. We see king to h4. Queen to h2 with check. We see queen to h3. And you actually have a very, very severe problem as black, because you do have checkmate on c8. If this queen is allowed to move to c8, it's checkmate, game over. So you have yourself in a really, really bad position, and the only check is queen to h4. But it doesn't matter, because the king can literally just walk itself up the board even more, and there are no checks. And so there is nothing else to be done in this position. And it is actually in this position that Jan Krzysztof Duda does resign the game. Because like I said, there is no way to defend your king. Your king is literally stalemated coming up here. You know, there's really not a lot of movement that the king can make. Can maybe go here, but you know, you're gonna be placing a check somewhere that's gonna lead you to getting possibly mated. So in this actual position, the computer actually gives bishop to d5 as the top move in the position. And the only reason why it gives bishop to d5, I mean, of course, you guys are looking like, wait a minute, can't you just take? Yes, you literally can just take the piece. But the reason why it's giving bishop to d5 is because after king to h5, you cannot cover with queen to f8 because of that check, because you actually have a check on e6. And then you have to move to f7, and then you see mate on f7. So the only reason why the computer wants to get bishop to d5 is to protect against this check, which is completely, you know, overwhelmingly mating. And then after this, you can actually see this. So, but I mean, it's crazy. Like I said, when you get to a point in the game where the computer starts saying, hey, throw this piece away for nothing, it's bad. Like, I mean, it's really, really bad. So, you know, Jan Krzysztof does resign the game before that point comes, but it is a very interesting situation. Now, follow my people in the Philippines for these good mornings and these different dialects for you. I hope I don't need my sheet. I just did good a second ago, so let me see what I'm looking like. So maanyong buntag, mayad na agahan, naimbag na bigat, masanto siya kabason, marhe na aga, buenos dias, maanyong aga, mapia na uma, Kapian Kapuno Dios, Mayapa Abak, Mayad na Aga, Mapia Agay, Mapia Kapapita, My Big Abukla, Maraja na Buntag, Maria Mainat, Maupe na Aga, Kasan Yangan C LUB, Assalamu alaikum, Merci beaucoup, Salam. Got him! Yes! I'm so happy about that still. I'm pretty much going to forever be happy about that. But I appreciate everybody very much for coming by, and I'll see y'all next time.